Hi team. We have made this webinar live on YouTube, right? Just now. Meta पे भी।
So Andrew, Tiffany will take another 2 minutes to join.
Okay. Do you want me to start out just by saying a few things about the University of Alabama?
Yeah, sure, we can do that. So
Okay.
students will be
Are there
joining? Yeah,
there are students on already?
yeah. So I think we can wait for 5 more minutes for all the students and Tiffany to join. And then
Okay, we'll do that. We can do that. No problem. I'm flexible.
So Andrew, how has been the impact of elections there? Alabama, I believe, is a red state.
It is. We don't really know what the impact is going to be. There's always the hope that it's positive.
Okay.
So, we're discussing that a lot. One thing we tell all of our current students and our prospective students is that as a university, we remain very much dedicated to creating opportunities for students worldwide. And so, our goal is to, students who have the ambition to move on to the next stage and do a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD, we want to talk to them and we want to give them opportunities. And none of that has been changed by the election. So, yeah.
So any changes you believe will come into place after, Donald Trump starts his term?
Uh, I don't really know what sort of changes to expect. I mean, probably with some countries, it might become harder to get a visa. I don't think that would be the case for anywhere in South Asia. We have heard a rumor that there might be a plan to create a path to residency for PhD students who are finishing their programs, which is actually very positive. So we're trying to take the positive.
To hear that.
There's other ways that this may impact some of the bureaucracy around universities in the US. We're going to find out in January when Trump's term starts. I suspect things will change fairly rapidly at that point.
Yeah.
Again, we're staying positive. Yeah, I have a meeting I'm going to in December.
Okay.
Where I will be actually running a panel discussion on this very topic.
Oh, wow.
And so talking about the potential impacts across the US. Yeah, so we're going to be learning lots in the next month.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because in India also we have been listening from the students that, you know, we were waiting for the decision to come. Students are also, you know,
Mhm.
they also have a lot of questions, what policy changes are going to come or what
Yeah.
would be the impact. So yeah, I mean, a lot of students, you know, they were waiting for the decision and now
Yeah. What sort of concerns are you hearing?
there are no concerns as such, but they were just anticipating that, you know, there might be some policy changes and maybe, you know, it would become harder for the students. It might become easier. So everyone was just guessing this and that. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
once,
Yeah.
you know, he starts his term, then maybe we'll have more clarity.
Morning, Tiffany.
Good morning.
Hi,
I'm so
Tiffany.
sorry. Just one of those days where the tech was like, not now.
It happens.
Yeah, doesn't it? Doesn't it always? Okay, how's everyone doing?
Great.
Good, excellent.
It's a lovely morning.
Yeah, it's nice here too. It's since I've been home anyway, this is the first day I've woken up and it's like properly freezing. So it's quite chilly here this
Oh.
morning.
No, we don't have that. It's still about 20 degrees outside.
Oh my God, really?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's really, is that normal for this time of year? It's taken a while for us to get like the right amount of cold.
Yeah, it's a little bit warmer than normal. This week we've been getting up above 30 degrees C most days.
Wow.
So, 90-ish, 80, 90.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
Good morning,
November.
everyone. Guys, students have joined us on YouTube. They're watching you live, and a few of the students have joined us here on Zoom as well. Would request you to start. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started then. Apologies, everyone, again for the delay, but thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I will start off with a brief introduction, and then we'll dive right into our questions. So, good morning, everyone, and good evening, depending on where you are watching this from. I am Tiffany Hardman. I'm Partnerships Manager for AECC, based here in the US. And we have with us this morning Dr. Andrew Goodliff. Andy, I will let you introduce yourself.
All right. So my name is Andrew Goodliff. I am Associate Dean for Admissions, Recruitment, and Fellowships in the University of Alabama Graduate School. I'm also a faculty member at the university, so sort of have that perspective as well. My specialization is geophysics and specifically seafloor mapping. So that's sort of my passion, but I recruit students across the whole university. Originally, I'm from the United Kingdom. I actually came to the US as an international student. So I have a lot of passion for bringing the best international students to our campus, and really sort of have an understanding of what you've got to go through with the visa process and the application process and how scary and confusing it can be. So I want to help.
Well, that is perfect. And we so appreciate you being here to walk us through some really important topics. So today we're going to talk about how to kind of craft a successful application. Andy is going to be kind enough to kind of walk us through what that looks like, particularly at the University of Alabama, but a lot of this is just kind of generally true information, no matter where you're applying. So we're going to get started here. Andy, what can you tell us about the University of Alabama and why students should consider applying there?
So the University of Alabama, excuse me, is a large public research university in the southeast of the US. You may have heard some of the conversation at the start. We're way down in the deep south, which means it's still relatively warm here, which is very nice. We have about 40,000 students on campus. We've got students from 80 different countries. About 6,000 of our students are master's and PhD students. Now, what do we offer for international students? Why should you consider us? We have really an amazing student life on campus. So that's one of the reasons. If you think about sort of the classic US university, that's us. Big, beautiful buildings, again, amazing student life, beautiful campus, amazing programs, and just sort of transitioning into those programs. We got about 150 different programs we offer across campus. About half of them are PhD, half of them are masters. We have top ranked programs. If you look at programs like advertising and public relations, it's #1 in the country. If you look at accounting, it's #10 in the country. Marketing is, I think, about the top 50 in the world. Then if we look at our sort of engineering and science facilities, it's absolutely amazing. I actually had the privilege the other day of touring one of our newest facilities, and it was amazing. It's cost us about $10 million to build, and it houses the most powerful microscope in the world right now. It's the
Wow.
most powerful commercially available microscope. And I got to speak to a new faculty member who has come to the University of Alabama just because we have that piece of equipment. So that gives you a sort of idea of the sort of magnitude of facilities that we have on campus. There's really something for everyone.
Wow, that is incredible. I
It's fun.
did not know
It's a
that.
huge microscope.
Wow, that's great. So lots of, you said, great student life, really classic kind of US university experience and top tier faculty and programs. So all of that, I mean,
Absolutely.
it takes a lot of boxes for a lot of students wondering where they
Yeah.
should go. In kind of that same vein, and in terms of the programs and the faculty that you have, what opportunities does the University of Alabama provide for research and internships to help students gain practical experience?
So we do have amazing research facilities. I just mentioned some of the STEM facilities, but it goes, even in the business field, we have, things like an amazing business analytics lab that was actually donated by one of our alumni, who was actually CEO of Lockheed Martin, of all places. And so those research facilities really exist across the disciplines. Obviously, they're going to look different in history to material science, but we've really put a lot of emphasis on having the best opportunities for students. One thing that we really emphasize, and again, this probably really applies more to the STEM fields, is hands-on experience. And so we have a lot of amazing equipment, amazing labs, and things like that new microscope we've got. That's not something that a tech is going to have access to and a student just gets to look at. That is something that a student will be using. So if their research is around that instrument, they will get to use that instrument. And I guess sort of in the engineering fields, that's sort of one of the things we're known for, is really that hands-on experience. So when students come out, they know how to use that equipment. They know how to apply it. So if they go work for ExxonMobil or something like that, they know the theory and they've used this equipment. That's not the case at all universities at all. Now, I think you mentioned sort of, getting more practical experience, internships as well. The fact that we're a large research university and we have amazing faculty, and a lot of those faculty are really engaged with industry, means that there are amazing opportunities outside of the university as well. So, for example, in my own research group, I work a lot with the oil industry. A lot of those companies like Schlumberger and ExxonMobil are collaborating with me. They come, they work in my lab, I go work in their labs. And my students go and intern with those companies because my students have got to know the people at those companies. So I think it was a couple of years ago, we were ranked #2 in the country by Princeton Review for internship opportunities. So, that's something we do really well. And we put a huge emphasis on, again, it's part of that practical experience. If we have a student who gets that internship experience, when they go off and get that job, that gives them something that other people applying to that job do not have.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of build in an advantage for students, because it's something that they're all naturally experiencing, but then they learn how important it is to network and know people and apply what they're learning in that hands-on environment that you mentioned. Andy, would you just talk a little bit about sort of like where exactly the University of Alabama is located and like the city, the community surrounding it as well? You mentioned kind of the students have these connections with companies and organizations, but if you could just touch on that a little bit more in terms of like the community and what that looks like for students, I think the audience would really appreciate it.
So one of the big selling points of the University of Alabama being located in the southeast of the US. So we're down next to Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi. That part of the US, one of the great things about it is it's very welcoming, very friendly. So the term we tend to use is Southern hospitality. So when an international student comes to campus, they might be walking around campus or walking around town, and people who live in the town may just stop and talk to them. It's very much a Southern thing. And if a student has spent their life in a big city, it's a little jarring at first that people are just coming up and talking to them. But they're just being friendly. They want to know about that person. They want to know more. And that really, one of the things in Tuscaloosa itself, and the town of Tuscaloosa is where the university is, town of about 200,000 people. That community has really come together to support the university. I've worked at a number of different universities, and I've never been at a university where the community supports the university so much. We have a group in the town called Tuscaloosa International Friends. It's not a university affiliated group, it's a community group. And it's a group that has said, hey, we want to make international students feel welcome. And so they actually place probably about half of our international students with families. Now, those international students are not living with those families, but they're basically paired with those families. So it might be, when we have a big holiday like Thanksgiving that's upcoming, that family might invite that student to their house for that dinner. Or that student may be just having trouble getting to the grocery store, helping them with that. Another thing Tuscaloosa International Friends has done is when students arrive, they've got to find an apartment. That apartment may be unfurnished. They've actually worked on furniture donations, and they have enough such that any international student who arrives does not have to buy furniture. Furniture will be donated for their apartment. It's really great. And this is a lot of those community members are really sort of, the active community members. They've worked in industry. They might have worked in the hotel industry. There was a big hotel shut down in a nearby town. They got that hotel to donate all of their furniture.
That's amazing.
And the university has actually dedicated a warehouse to hold all this. And so it's an amazing thing. And these are folks who just, they want to ensure that people feel welcome, and especially our international students. So it's a community that really embraces our students. And you see that again and again at events. I always tell, one thing we have in Alabama, some of our international students may not be aware of this, is we have a big football team. Our football team is very, very famous. And we have big football games every other week during the fall on campus. And these are big events. And on our quad, the central part of the campus, there's people tailgate. They have set up tents, they're cooking food. And I challenge our international students to walk across the quad without someone offering them food.
It simply will not happen. I bet no one has ever made it. Oh, that's so great. I always say this when universities talk about like their big sporting events. I personally am not like a huge sports fan or follower, but I cannot stress enough to international students, even if you're not interested in necessarily what's happening, the experience is incredible. You will absolutely have an amazing time.
Yeah, and for me, I'm not a big. I didn't grow up with American football. I'm not massively into it. But the what we call the tailgating part of this, where people are basically, setting up tents on our quad, I love that. That's
Oh yeah.
fantastic. I can embrace that.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for a little bit more about sort of what the surrounding community is up to. That's incredible that Tuscaloosa International Friends is just an organic community organization that has such a positive impact on the international student community at Alabama. So switching gears a little bit, working our way kind of in, now that students are primed to submit their applications to the University of Alabama, let's talk a little bit about how to do that successfully. So we're going to talk a lot about a statement of purpose, or might refer to it as SOP. So just be aware of that, audience. Andy, can you share with us some of the key elements that should be included in a well-crafted statement of purpose and how students can effectively communicate their goals and experiences?
So I'm very passionate about the statement of purpose because it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily do well. And it's probably far more important than most people think. So I very often have prospective students come to me and say, I have this GPA, can I get in? Well, that's not a question I can answer because other parts of the application are very important, the statement of purpose being one of those. For the statement of purpose, we're broadly looking at three main things. So we want to know the academic foundation. What has the student done to prepare themselves for the graduate degree? And they could talk about their undergraduate degree, or it might be they're applying to a PhD and they've got a master's. Talk about basically that, things that really excited them during that. It could be that they're talking about internship experience, research experience, any sort of leadership experience that's relevant to what they want to do. So really that foundation. Now, this is not the student's life story. This is basically that foundation that we're going to build upon for that graduate degree. So we don't want to know what they did when they're 5. We want to know what they've done, anything that's relevant to this future degree. So that's sort of a very important part. And most students do that relatively well. They may sort of make it more of a life story, but that's usually done fairly well. Sort of the center part is the part that many students don't do well. And that is, why the University of Alabama? Why is a student picking the University of Alabama? What do they want to do when they get here? And very often, especially in some of the STEM fields, who do they want to work with? What lab do they want to work in? So we really want to know the why. We want to see that a student has done their research and they know about Alabama and they're serious about the University of Alabama. Very often the SOPs that we get are far more generic and they kind of miss that. Now, the final part of this, and this is probably a smaller part, is we also want to know what the student wants to do next. What are their career goals? So, in my own particular field, a student might want to go into academia, they might want to go into industry. I'm interested in working with both students, but I'm going to prepare them differently based on those interests. So I'm going to put them through the program differently because there's different ways you need to prepare those students for those careers. So really those are sort of the three main parts. And it's that center part that students really often don't do well. And I do want to say, unfortunately, we do reject students from the University of Alabama. There are students who get turned down. It's usually not because of a GPA. It's usually because, based on the statement of purpose, we're not a good fit. We can't get the student to where they want to be. That's usually the answer of why we reject a student.
So it's really, I think that certainly in certain areas, it might be a little scary for a student to get so specific, but you are saying more specificity is better because they want to make sure, you want to make sure that the student understands how they would fit in, what they would be doing, and how Alabama can kind of help get them to their next step. Yeah.
Yes, very, very much. And, there's a lot of web resources now. A student can, we have very good web pages where students can look up what the different labs do, what the different faculty do, maybe even what the old students are now doing as careers. When I first applied to university in the US, we didn't have the internet. I had to go look stuff up in the library and that sort of thing. So it's so much easier for folks now. I'm jealous.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you can also, I'm sure that Alabama has some socials that not only talk about sort of campus life generally, but I'm sure that there are some accounts that talk about, who's doing what and like the work, the
100%.
research, the equipment, everything like that. So there are lots of opportunities for students nowadays to understand exactly what's happening at Alabama and what it means for them. So
Absolutely.
you mentioned the kind of different parts of the application and how they just kind of do different things for the committee, like reviewing. So they contribute in different ways to the committee's understanding about what the student wants, what they've done, what they want to do, and how they might fit in. So how much weight do you think, or would you say the admissions committee typically gives to the statement of purpose or letters of recommendation compared to other parts of the application, like the scores, the transcripts, kind of the numbers part?
So it's going to vary from program to program, but I spend a lot of time talking to the different program directors, and really probably at the end of the day, the most important part is that statement of purpose, because we get an idea of how passionate that student is. So writing that well and really getting across your passion is important. We get to see how well prepared they are. We get to see how good a fit they are. Now, that's not to say that the other parts are not important. So, for example, letters of recommendation, there we're looking for, something from the recommenders that really confirms the skill set that the student has. Talks about, do they work well in teams, that sort of thing. The things like the transcripts, of course, we're going to look at those. But I think I've already mentioned this, the overall score that a student has, CGPA, is really not as important as students think it is. We're going to look at that. It is important, but we're probably going to look more closely at things like what did they get in particular classes. So it might be that a student is applying to computer science. Our computer science program looks at particular classes as indicators of success. And so they'll look at the grades in those particular classes. If you're going to computer science, I mean, I hate to say this, but computer science is not particularly bothered what a student got in English literature. It's
that makes
more
a lot of sense.
We do want to know that a student is dedicated. They're not getting D's or something like that. But, are they getting an A or a B in that key indicator in computer science? Yeah, so, and it might be some programs have other things like writing samples and that sort of stuff. If you're applying to our English program, writing sample is required. We have some programs that do require a research proposal. We have some programs, luckily it's in the minority, that require things like GRE and GMAT. Some of those programs are very particular about their scores, but they're still going to look at the statement of purpose. And one thing that one of my colleagues said recently, I think really needs repeating, is if they have a student who has absolutely fantastic grades. They might have the equivalent of a 4.0 from the US, but their statement of purpose is, really not that great. There's no guarantee they're going to be admitted. They might not be admitted. But if they've got a really great statement of purpose, their statement of purpose is fantastic, and their grades are okay. They're not fantastic, but they're okay. That student is probably more likely to be admitted. So that really tells you where the priorities are.
Yeah, that's such a good way of summarizing it as well, because and understanding kind of the weight without, like, putting numbers on it or anything necessarily, like, oh, SOP is this percent of your admissibility or not, because there's kind of an art and a science, I know, to reviewing applications and kind of, forming your incoming class. But that's a really great thing, I think, for students to think about, especially if they are maybe, that computer science major who did not do so great in English or something to that effect. Just know that, like, that doesn't necessarily mean more than your application overall, looking at it kind of holistically. So we talked a little bit about letters of rec, but do you have any tips for students on like what they should be looking for in a recommender?
Absolutely. So I actually talk a lot to students about graduate school who are just starting their bachelor's. So at the University of Alabama, I'll go talk to a freshman class about grad school, and they're like, wow, it's really early to be talking to us about this. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Because I need to prepare you. And the big thing that you need to do is work to find good recommenders. So what we tell students at the University of Alabama is when a professor who's teaching a class has office hours, I want you to go to those office hours, because I want you to know that professor more than just some person
भैया
at the
अलग अलग
class.
पकड़िए 3 तो एक साथ पैक करने
So really, students need to develop relationships with those professors. Very often it might be a large class. You don't really talk to that professor. You need to get to know that professor. Ask questions. Go to office hours. Ask them about career advice. Ask them about how to apply to grad school. Guess what? They've all applied to grad school. They have experience. Use that experience. So you really need to have recommenders who know you. If there's opportunities to do undergraduate research with a professor, take those opportunities, because then you're going to really get to know that professor. So you really need those people who can really speak to a wide skill set. If a recommender, all they can say is, hey, this student's great, they got to be in my class, that's actually not useful to us, because I can see that from the transcript. However, if that professor can say, hey, this student's great, they got to be in my class, they're extremely passionate, I've worked with them in my lab, they're dedicated, they come on time, they work well with the team in my lab, they're very innovative, they're always coming up with new ideas, new ways to do things, that's a good letter of recommendation. So that's really what we're looking for. And I should add that, typically we require 3 letters of recommendation. Typically, all 3 come from a faculty member or professor. But if you've got work experience, it's okay in most cases, for one of those to come from a supervisor, because that's talking about a different skill set now. Yeah. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We get lots of letters of recommendation that unfortunately aren't that useful. And my big goal with the applications process is, I know we've got a lot of really good students who are applying, but sometimes those letters of recommendation don't really express how good that student is. So really put a lot of thought into who those recommenders are. That's important.
Yeah, I really love that. Those are great tips. I would also add, so I've done, full disclosure, I've done more of my application reviewing on the undergraduate side, but I have seen loads and loads of not PhD, but master's level applications. And it's quite apparent typically. You can tell when a recommender doesn't really know the student very well. And as you said, that's not really useful as you're trying to review the student and consider them as a candidate for your program, because the letter doesn't tell you anything outside of what other information like the transcript can tell you. So I think also sometimes students might prioritize sort of the prestige of the faculty member, but if you have a prestigious faculty member that doesn't know you, that's still not necessarily a good fit for receiving a letter of recommendation from them, because the point of the LOR is so that the admissions committee can learn more about you and your skill set, as you've mentioned many times, Andy. So those are really good.
Absolutely.
Really helpful. Switching gears a little bit, we kind of touched on this before, but students that have a little bit of difficulty maybe with writing, you've mentioned how important the SOP is, but if a student kind of struggles with writing, what maybe could they do to kind of strengthen that SOP? If let's say no matter where their grades are, if they're kind of okay, or if they're really stellar, but they struggle a bit with kind of articulating things, how can they do better?
Well, so struggling with writing is a very normal thing. I suspect that a large proportion of the folks on this call are from the STEM fields. It doesn't matter whether it's an international student or a domestic student. Most don't like writing if they're in the STEM fields. The passion is working with computers or working with seafloor mapping instruments like myself. That's what they want to be doing. Don't want to be writing. But the reality is you got to write. If you're doing a PhD, you've got to write a dissertation. If you're doing a master's, you've probably got to do a project or a thesis. So writing skills are important. Now, I'm someone who I don't particularly enjoy writing, but again, I've got to do it. I always view this as a team sport, not an individual sport. And so grad school is that. It's a team sport. So use all the resources to improve your writing. So if I'm talking to students at the University of Alabama, I'm telling them, okay, your statement of purpose, I want you to take it to our writing center. The writing center is going to help them improve it. I want you to take it to our career center. They're going to help you improve it. I want you to show it to your great aunt or whoever. They're going to help you improve it. Show it to your friend. So don't do this in isolation. Have other people look at it. Show it to your professor who has already, at some stage in their life got into grad school. They know about these things. So make sure that other people are helping you. Now, a common question, I've actually got this twice this week, is use of AI in creating things like statements of purpose.
Yeah.
So here's my advice here. Do not go to ChatGPT and say, create me a statement of purpose for chemical engineering at the University of Alabama, because it's not going to be a good statement of purpose, because ChatGPT does not know about your foundation. It doesn't know about the particular professor in the lab. It doesn't know what you want to do next in your career. You're going to get something very generic. They're quite impressive. I tried exactly that thing, create me a statement of purpose for chemical engineering at the University of Alabama. It looks great, but it's not going to get you into grad school. However, if you've created a statement of purpose and you've been through a lot of review, taking that, putting it in ChatGPT and say, improve my grammar. That's fine. That's fine. You're using it as a tool. And there's lots of other tools available. There's Grammarly, and we have spell checkers, that sort of thing. That's okay. So using it as a tool to help your writing, not creating that document, is really what you want to do. We actually, looking at statements of purpose, you can quickly glance and you can see the ones that are primarily AI. They're just not substantive. Yeah. So So really just finding assistance, using the resources available to you to really help improve that document. Because again, my goal is that I want to see how great you are. I want that really to be reflected by the statement of purpose. So making sure that is well written, making sure there are no grammar mistakes, because almost always on every review committee, there's someone who's going to pick on grammar. That's just reality.
It's always somebody's hobby horse, isn't it?
Yeah, there's always somebody. And so, don't give them that opportunity to sort of grade your SOP down.
Yeah, that's a good pro tip and a great way to incorporate the use of AI. I hadn't even thought about that because when I was reviewing applications, we were not looking at AI written essays. But yeah, it is much more obvious than you think. So use it as a tool. Do not use it to create and be, who you are. And again, the whole point of the application and what the review committee is looking for is who you are as a person, as a student, and how you'll fit into the program, the university, the community. And if those things all fit, everyone's happy. But if
Absolutely.
GPT writes your statement of purpose, those aren't your words. That doesn't give the committee an idea of who you are. So be wise about how we're using AI in this context, because the review committee will know. I really like your concept of having the SOP be a team sport. I think that that's really comforting for students to hear. I think a lot of times students might feel like, well, if I'm going to do this degree, I should be able to be prepared for it. But actually, you don't need to have the experience and credentials that you'll gain by the end of the degree in order to apply for it and be eligible for it. You actually shouldn't be that good. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not really a great move for you necessarily. So you want to take that kind of space that you're in and show where you are and talk about where you want the program and experience to take you. That's all part of the process.
And we're going to, when you come to the University of Alabama, we're going to give you lots of opportunities to improve your writing, lots of professional development opportunities, lots of classes. We're looking for potential. We're not looking for a finished product. We're going to help round you out and train you properly. We're looking for potential training.
Yeah, you're applying as a brick of clay, and you want to show the committee what they can help kind of mold you into and what you'll become. It is also a team sport to do a program like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do want to say, even, as a professional, I'm a professor, I'm an administrator. If I'm writing documents, I very rarely do that in isolation. I'm collaborating with other people. I've got other people reviewing them. So that's kind of what real life is like.
Absolutely. No one's doing everything. Sorry, my cat has joined us. But she's interested in applying to the University of Alabama, it would seem. No one is doing everything all alone. Everyone is working together collaboratively in some capacity. And so it's okay to be doing that at the application stage. It's highly encouraged. It's advised to be doing that at the application stage as well. All right, so let's see. I kind of mentioned this. I know that if those of you who are watching, who are listening, I'm sure if you have looked into applying to a U.S. university at all, you've seen or heard the phrase holistic review. I mentioned it earlier, as I said. So can you share with us sort of what exactly is a holistic review? What does it mean? And how does it apply to postgraduate level applications at the University of Alabama?
So when we talk about holistic reviews, that really means we're taking all of that information and that's supplied in the application. So the application form, your resume, your CV, your statement of purpose, the letters of recommendation, any writing samples, even things like communications with faculty. I mean, we take that into account. There's just those conversations. And we are really taking that as a whole and looking at assessing that student using all of those things. So at a basic level of a committee that's reviewing an application may have what we call is a rubric. And so they're scoring the application based off that rubric. And they're saying, okay, statement of purpose, we're looking for these things. We're going to score based on this scale. transcripts, we're looking for these things, we're going to score based on this scale. Letters of recommendation, again, we're looking for these things, we're going to score based on this scale. And we're all combining that. We're putting different weights on different things. Different departments will do this different ways. Different departments will be looking for different things. And then we're coming up with sort of, okay, does this student have potential for success? And really overall, when you think about the application, it is it's really a tool that we use to assess potential for success. That's the goal of the application. And so we basically determine, okay, this student has a high level of success based on all this material. This one will most likely be admitted. This one, sorry, they're not, they're going to be ranked lower. And so, again, when students come to me and say, can I get in with this GPA? Most postgraduate programs, universities really can't answer that because we are looking at the whole student, at the whole document. And I do want to emphasize, when you're communicating with faculty, how you communicate with faculty, that's also a factor because, that's sort of our first impression of you. When you come along and send us an email, that's the first time we've met you. That's where we form our opinions. So be very careful with that as well.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I have spoken with faculty members before who have had maybe kind of unpleasant interactions with students, or it just kind of didn't jive, and then that student is applying to their program. But as we've said, and with holistic review, the review committee is trying to understand who the student is as a person more than just who they are on their transcript. And your emails and the way that you talk to professors and others is part of who you are as a person. And so all of that is kind of up for grabs in terms of the potential review. I always recommend to students to kind of use the same like a version of the SOP standard when they're communicating. Like, you want to make sure you have good punctuation and good grammar if you're emailing people. Yep. That's a pretty standard baseline. You don't want to be too casual, like, hey man, I have a question, but you don't necessarily need to be overly formal and stiff either. Just, communicate in a way that kind of reflects the respect you have for the person you're speaking with, and kind of, demonstrates that you understand sort of what that interaction should look like. But yeah, all of that is part of it. If you're in communication with anyone on the committee or anyone on faculty or those that you're getting recommendations from, if they're like, well, you're a great student in my class, but we have had these other issues in other areas and maybe I'm not comfortable writing recommendation letters. So you want to make sure that all your interactions kind of have that understanding of meeting that baseline of the grammar, the punctuation, the formality without being too stiff, but that it's a positive reflection on you as well.
Yeah, I probably get about 50 emails a week that start out with something like, hey, prof, do you have funding? That's not a good email. That's not a good email, folks.
No, that's not a good impression. So take note. Not a good impression. Okay, so focusing a little bit more on PhD specifically, kind of as we're entering our last phase maybe of this conversation here. What are the most important skills or attributes that admissions reviewers are looking for in a prospective PhD student?
So I think for me, because I've actually been in that position looking for PhD students myself, and it's probably true of most of my colleagues, probably one of the best predictors of success is passion. I want to really see a student who is passionate about their topic, because if they have that passion, they will push themselves to do well in classes. They'll push themselves to do well in lab. Now, having that foundation and good grades is obviously important as well. But I often say that I would far rather have a very passionate B-level student than an A student who really I can't get excited about.
Yeah.
And we have we have a lot of very famous alumni who have done amazing things. And I've had the pleasure to talk to a lot of them. And guess what? Most of them aren't A students. They're B or, but they had amazing passion and they did great things. And so looking for that passion, looking for a student who is coming up with new ideas. Really, I mean, thinking about my own program, what drove me through that was I was constantly thinking about, okay, what are some new ways to do things? What are some novel ways to do things? So in those conversations with faculty, don't be afraid to say, hey, I've got this really cool idea based on this paper, this could be an area I could work on. That's what really good students are doing. Now, when you get to the University of Alabama, it might be that, yeah, that isn't quite right, but you've shown you have initiative. So we really want to see that passion, that initiative. We want to see good grades. I do want to see good writing. But again, we're going to work with folks on this because, again, I know in STEM fields, no one likes writing. So we're going to help you with that.
Yeah,
But,
you just have to be able to communicate, but you don't have to be, the next great novelist.
Yeah. I mean, when I talk with our professors, what are the issues that they're having with students? It mostly focuses on writing because all of our students are technically very capable. They're all very capable of doing things. And so that's an area we're going to provide a lot of help. And we do. We have a lot of resources. But again, focusing back on that passion, that's to me is one of the best predictors of success.
That's wonderful. And such a good takeaway, I think, overall, kind of as we've talked throughout this whole conversation, that you don't have to be the perfect student on paper. There are other ways that demonstrate that you're a great candidate, that you'll do great things, and passion is one of them.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we've talked a little bit about how to kind of build your team as you're thinking about applying, or even as you're a current student, maybe in a master's program looking toward PhD. So how should students approach professors for PhD opportunities, and what factors do professors consider when selecting students?
So most likely that first interaction with a professor is going to be an email. And so
A well-crafted, grammatically correct, not too casual email.
exactly. And that email really has to focus on what you want to do, how you fit in that professor's research group, really those sorts of things. And, it may be that in that email, that professor may have a key publication, a key paper, saying something like, hey, I read your paper, even if you haven't fully read it. You've probably read the abstract, you understand it. I saw your paper. It's fantastic work. I love how you did this. Because most professors, we have large egos. We like it if people say, hey, that was a great paper. So really, really making that about that research group, why you want to work in that research group, what skills you have, what you can contribute to that group. A very common mistake in emails that go to professors, and I see a lot of these each week, is the first question is about funding. So I want you to resist that. So in that first email, I would honestly not talk about funding, talk about that fit.
Okay.
We all know that funding is important. Every professor knows that a student needs funding. So we're very aware of that, and we know that is a priority for you. But you're not going to get into a program because you need funding. You're going to get into a program because of the fit. So focus on that. Once you've basically got a professor who's really interested in you based on, it might be 2 or 3 emails going back and forth, might have a Zoom. That's when the professor will most likely bring up funding. So that will come up organically if you're a really good fit to that professor. Don't make these emails long. A couple of paragraphs is okay. We don't, if I open an email that's 10 pages long, I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to look at that later.
Later.
And I'm forget, to be perfectly honest. So make it something that's easy to see. It really up front. It tells you why you're a great student. Could be some variation on your statement of purpose, I think Tiffany mentioned. But avoid talking about funding because you don't want the impression to be that funding is your priority rather than your passion for aerospace engineering or something like that. So that, and again, those first emails, that is the first impression that the professor gets. And if the first thing you talk about is funding, they're probably not going to answer. I get a lot of emails from students who say, hey, I've been trying to reach these professors in our mechanical engineering department. And very often, if I'm in a particularly charitable mood, I'll say, okay, send me that email. Let's take a look at it. And very often it talks about funding first. It's got inconsistent fonts. It's messy. So, just helping them neaten that up. Because remember, those really good professors that you want to work with, they're getting probably, I mean, some of them hundreds of emails a week from students.
Absolutely.
It's a lot. So yours needs to stand out.
Yes, and I think it's a really important factor that you mentioned, that to stand out, it doesn't have to be long, and in fact shouldn't be too long, because faculty members are extremely busy and they're inundated with emails like this. You want to stand out by showing that you understand that you respect their time, that you respect their work, and that's what you're really tuned into, more so than just like, hey, you're here and I need some money, so can we make this work? That's not the conversation to be having.
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. A couple more questions. So when should students ideally begin their application process to ensure they have enough time for the whole review process, for funding consideration, as well as we both know that doesn't necessarily need to be spoken immediately, but it is part of the process. So what kind of timeline would you suggest for students to consider?
Well, so it can vary based on whether it's a master's student or a PhD student. Master's students can probably leave it a little bit later. And I'll come back to that. So doctoral students, if you see a program has a deadline of, I mean, our biology program has a deadline of December 1 for full admission, very early deadline.
Very.
Yeah, if you see that deadline, you should probably be applying in September. You really want to apply well before these deadlines. And there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it might be that there's a problem with getting your transcripts or something like that. You need to have time to fix that to make sure that application is complete by the deadline. It may be that, dread the thought you have to do a GRE or something like that. That takes time. But the main reason is because those really good programs, they're not waiting until that deadline to admit the first people. If someone really good comes along, they're going to admit them as fast as possible. And so by the time you hit that deadline, some of the positions may have gone. And even some of the funding may have gone. So applying early gives you the best opportunities to have a good application, and it allows you the best opportunities for funding. You also want to make sure what sort of deadline it is. Some programs may have a rolling deadline, meaning that they're continuously admitting. You still need to apply early because, again, funding goes away. Some may have a priority deadline. That means if you want funding, you've got to apply by this time. But if you just want to be admitted, you can apply 3 months later. So there's all these different kinds of deadlines. A lot of our master's programs tend to have later deadlines, business and engineering. It's probably going to be more sort of March, April, May. But again, you still want to apply early in order to be eligible for funding because, for example, I run our fellowship program. Our first fellowship deadline is in January. So if you're applying to a program in March, you've missed that deadline.
Excellent. That's really key to consider because it is a lengthy process applying, and you want to make sure that you control what you can control, right? So you can't necessarily control how long it takes to get your transcripts. If there are issues with that, it would be better to have done it sooner rather than later. So the earlier, the better in most cases, is
Absolutely.
always good advice. All right. So last question here, or maybe this will elicit maybe one or two more, but what I want to leave students with this morning/evening is some pro tips. So what pro tips do you have that can help students stand out from other applicants when applying to U.S. universities at the PG level?
So I think, we're often looking for students who have done more than's required of them. So students who've gone above and beyond. So, I really like to see students who have done undergrad research. It's not something that's necessary. It's not something that's required in many cases, but it's something that a student, if they're really interested in sort of going that research path, they might take the initiative to do. And again, not every student's done this. And so that just shows me that that student is really interested in what they want to do, and they're prepared to do something extra, even though it's a lot of work and they're already very busy. They're prepared to
Yeah.
go the extra mile. And the same applies to things like internships. They've taken the initiative to do this thing they don't have to do to get experience. So the applications that really stand out are those ones where we can see that this student is going above and beyond. They're doing more than they need to. That's what we like to see. So that's really one of the best ways of standing out. Yeah, I mean, really, yeah.
And that leads right into your wanting to see passion, right? So if students are taking the
Absolutely.
time out of their free time, even at the undergraduate level, to dabble here and there, to get that internship, to compete for that research spot, they are inherently demonstrating that they're passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing. If a student has an opportunity to present at a conference or anything like this, or co-author with their professor, if we have, and I'll be perfectly frank here, if we have a student who's coming in who has already published a paper with their professor and it's in a decent journal, the rest of the application really doesn't matter. We're going to admit that student because they've already done what we want them to do in the program.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be coming in with quite an advantage, I imagine.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So those are exactly the sorts of students we want.
Excellent. Well, that is the proest of pro tips. Excellent. Well, I like to kind of summarize some of our thoughts here at the end of a conversation like this. And also just, Dr. Gillen, thank you so much for providing all these insights. I hope that the audience found it useful. I know I learned a ton. And I think that it's a lot of what we do on the admission side of things is kind of manage the fears and concerns that students have. And I think that you've done a really good job of doing
Thank you.
that. So I wanted to just kind of, and jump in wherever you feel is appropriate, summarize some of our key points today. So one, students do not have to be perfect on paper. And in fact, sometimes it's more advantageous if they aren't, if they can kind of talk about sort of what they've been doing, what they're passionate about, what they plan to do in the future, and how the program at Alabama, for example, could help them achieve those goals. We're talking sort of making sure that you are getting specific as well, not being afraid to get specific in your statement of purpose, and in fact, being sure that you do so that the review committee understands that you understand what the program has to offer and how you might fit into it. Students with great grades, this I believe is a paraphrase of what one of your colleagues said, but students with great grades, but a weak statement of purpose, there's no guarantee of admission. However, if a student has a great statement of purpose and kind of mediocre grades even, or just kind of a B average, that student is more likely to get in, depending on, how they're kind of demonstrating their passion and their interest. But it's not a guarantee. If you have a 4.0 that you're guaranteed in, and you
We
have.
reject a lot of people that have 4.0s.
I think that is so, I mean, it's maybe not comforting for a 4.0 student to hear, but I think it's so comforting to understand that, because a lot of times students really rely heavily on how they look on paper. And as we talked about with holistic review, that's only one part of the application and only one part of what the committee is looking for. And as a reminder, your application goes beyond just the paperwork you submit to apply. If you're talking with professors, if you're talking with faculty members, you're sending emails, that's part of it too. You should be respectful, you should be thorough, well thought out, but not too lengthy and never too casual. And then, of course, I want to reiterate just what a wonderful opportunity the University of Alabama can present to international students with top-notch faculty, top-tier resources, incredible equipment, and opportunities to work with people and with the equipment hands-on as a student at Alabama. You get a traditional campus experience in the very hospitable South. And it sounds like the whole community is ready to welcome you with Tuscaloosa International Friends standing by. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Dr. Goodliffe, would you add anything else to my summary here, or anything else that maybe didn't come up that you think is really important to mention?
No, I think we've actually been very thorough here. You know, obviously, I would welcome applications from anyone who's on this call, or just if you contact Tiffany's team, they can put you in contact with me. If you do reach out to me and you tell me that you've been part of this webinar today, I would be happy to consider you for an application fee waiver. So that would be more than happy to do that. And, you know, the best thing would be welcoming you to the University of Alabama at our orientation. I absolutely love it when I'm at the orientation, a student comes up to me and says, "Hey, I met you at that fair," or "You're on that webinar." That makes my day.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, so as you are building your team to help you apply, students, if you're listening, reach out to our staff at AECC. They can help you get in touch with Dr. Goodliffe. They can help you kind of prepare your application, understand some deadlines, kind of understand how to work on some of the things that we mentioned here, like your writing skills and making sure that you kind of meet all those baseline criteria that we mentioned throughout our conversation. So definitely get in touch with our counselors. They can help you kind of take the next step, or get in touch with the right people to have those necessary conversations and submit a really successful application. All right. Well, thank you again so much. Yeah, this was really lovely. And I know that we have plans to do this again, maybe in the spring. So if you are just really ahead of the game as an audience member and you're not even quite applying yet, tune in the spring, and we will be back with more to teach and more to learn.
All right. Well, thanks everyone, and have a wonderful evening. I've still got the rest of my day to go. It's about 7:30 a.m. here. So
yes, we got an early start this morning. It's not quite as early for me as it was for you. And thank you all again for understanding the late arrival on my end. I really appreciate that. So thanks to everyone for joining, and Dr. Goodliffe, again, thank you so much for your information.
all right. Bye-bye.
Bye.